Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Amongst the news items we have for you this week, there is the Damar Hamlin situation, where anti-vaxxers have come out of the woodwork to make all kinds of interesting and bold claims. There is the increased consumption of cannabis by children in America, further proof, if any was ever required, that we really do put more time and effort into ensuring people can have sex than just about anything else. The not so delightful investigation of what happens when you put miniature human brains into mice and see what kind of response you can get. There is the pathway that a particular hornet has taken in Europe, and just how we know that that's the particular pathway it's taken. There are the fossilized remains of a dinosaur sort of bird that helps to further bridge the gap between the two. A technology that would allow us to basically have unlimited fresh water, and the truly bizarre incident of a paper that was published using the letter T as an error bar. The timestamps for these and other news items can be found in the description box below. Let's start with the Damar Hamlin situation. In short, they are an American football player who collapsed partway through a game. Anti-vaxxers are claiming that the collapse was caused by a reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine. This is a relatively baseless accusation and ignores a lot of what reality has shown us about sports and why you probably shouldn't be engaging in sports. The whole conspiracy behind this has been perpetuated by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the American congresswomen who has something of a reputation. They put out that before the COVID vaccines, we didn't see athletes dropping dead on the playing field like we do now. Time to investigate the COVID vaccines. This was a widely spread tweet. Unfortunately, it's also a widely wrong tweet. There is a well and long documented history of people in sports collapsing due to heart failure and similar. Sports are a very stressful activity. This is why you sweat, get tired, have breathing difficulties, have a fast beating heart, and all sorts of other symptoms. You are effectively engaging the fight or flight response that's meant to allow you to survive things like bears, lions, tigers, and more threats, and get away from them over a short term, over an hour or more on a regular basis. This is why the body struggles with it, and why we see events like people collapsing from heart problems, whether that is cardiac deaths due to something like a blockage, or due to an issue to do with the cardiac system failing, specifically looking at the issue around the ability of the nervous system to innervate the heart and continue to pump blood. It's not meant to keep going for an incredibly long time. It's meant to either get you away from the threat or give you at least some chance of surviving. This is why the whole debacle around Damar Hamlin is so asinine. If any effort was put into this for more than a few moments of Google searching, people would find out that there is a clear distinction between cardiac arrest, which is what happens when the nervous system fails to work properly in innervating the heart, and a heart attack. Heart attacks are when the heart's blood gets blocked, normally because of a blood clot or similar. The first instant happens regularly, and at least one study has found that there have been more than 11,000 players who could have been involved in similar sorts of scenarios over 20 years of data. No, that's not a huge number, but that doesn't mean that the phenomena, even if it is rare, is impossible. And this is the distinction between the insane, nuffy arguments being put out and reality. Going from stupid arguments from stupid people to bizarre observations. In America, there are more children accidentally consuming cannabis in one form or another. The increase has occurred more and more regularly over recent years, and this has gone mostly lockstep in conjunction with the number of states that have legalized recreational use of cannabis. In 2017, there were 200 incidences of children under 5 consuming something with a cannabis product or some sort of infusion of cannabis, such as flavoring, extracts, active compounds, etc. In 2021, this was over 3,050. That is a huge increase in just 4 years. Of the cases that have been reported over this time, 8% of them required admission for intensive care and 15% were hospitalized. The median age was 3 years. There is a reason why cannabis has been restricted. Now, we're not saying that cannabis shouldn't be allowed for adults, but much like any other drug that is out there, whether it is alcohol, acetaminophen, or anything else, it should be controlled by the adults in that environment, and children should not have easy enough access where they can simply consume it. Admittedly, most adults are much too busy with other things than worrying about their children now. One of the more common concerns, and perhaps more prominent in the minds of males, is erectile dysfunction. Depending on your circumstances and other comorbidities, you may be using the little blue pill to compensate for this factor. In others, particularly where injury is present, that may not be an option. This is where the interesting experiment using pigs comes into play. It's research from the South China University of Technology, and they basically took a number of pigs and caused dysfunction in their member. The member in turn caused erectile dysfunction, and they were then trying to treat this with surgery. The experiment's interesting to say the least. As the article points out, the ability to graft tissue from one part of the body to another often doesn't work, and if it does, it can lead to even shorter penises than what are already there. Remember, your bat is always shorter than you think. This is why they've used a completely synthetic product, primarily a synthetic analog to the spongy collagen fibers which make up the area called the tunica albuginea. This is the area that blood fills and causes an erection. The experiment showed success in all of the animals that were used for a month, so this is obviously a very short-term project, and it will raise longer-term issues around safety, the same way some breast plant material has issues. It is noteworthy that it did not replace all of the other functional parts of the area it was put into, and so this is a concern, but not necessarily a big concern, so long as the area is still functional and has survived without the part of the penis that was missing. Tests in humans may be much less willing given how it had to be set up. In research that also didn't really require much in the way of a willingness on the part of the animals was the use of implantable human brains into mice and tests to see if they would respond to light stimulation. Depending on what's happened, you may or may not either have experienced or know someone who has lost part of their brain function. This could be that they simply don't have as good memory as they previously did, that they've acquired some sort of disease, like for example mad cow disease in the UK. They've had surgeries to deal something like a brain tumour. The list goes on, but a loss of brain function is a problem. This is where human cortical organoids, or effectively tiny cultured brain cells that can be used, are being tested. The idea here was to see if, in theory, they could be used to replace some of the functionality of eyes. Now, this is not to say they're a complete replacement, rather, is this a start that shows that something can be done? Further to using the cultured cells, they then ran a line from the eyeball to the part of the brain where this would then have its normal interactions, basically following the occipital nerve. This worked for the most part, and it seems to indicate that yes, at least after 2 months, the animal was able to completely integrate both the implanted cells and all the other systems that are involved. Next we go to health news, and specifically health news that's encouraging you to drink more water. This is a good example of why you should be a little bit cautious with health news. As we've previously reported on the 8 glasses of water a day is good for you at health advice, there's a reason to think that that is wrong, or at least completely misconstrued. In this case, even though they have a large study involving 11,255 adults, and they were questioned multiple times over 25 years, there's still a lot of issues with this. 5 surveys sent out over 25 years is not exactly the most compelling research. It is a much more compelling longitudinal study and can give very strong indications, but that's not the same thing as an actual relationship. This is one of the reasons why these observation studies are really hard to translate to the real world. The way water comes into this is something we've also mentioned in the same video on water consumption and health. That is, the more water you consume, the more sodium and other solutes you remove from your body. Now, if you have a high level, this is ideal. If you have a low level, that is very bad. The research that keeps being cited in the study goes on about how high levels of sodium can be closely linked to heart issues, notably high blood pressure, and then consequential issues to do with heart failure or heart injury. Again, both of these are perfectly valid arguments, but it's unclear if the behavior and the outcome are linked in such a clear-cut manner. Going from research that is somewhat interesting but rather questionable to even more questionable but bizarre research. The idea that a woman can smell whether or not a male is single or partnered. Yeah, it's one of those bizarre social studies. These studies are a good indicator that for some reason men are attracted to women at particular times and women are attracted to men under particular circumstances. From an evolutionary point of view, it makes sense. Being able to identify somehow when a woman is ovulating would obviously give a greater chance of reproduction, and if a woman's attracted to a more successful male, the offspring would be better cared for. Yes, it's very basic, but it is a at least believable rationale. The study in question goes several steps further than that. It looked at 82 heterosexual women between the ages of 18 and 35. They then had 3 single men and 3 partnered men wear shirts. The men were told to wear the shirts for 24 hours so that their sweat could soak into it. They then provided a passport-type photo, which is reasonably no frills. The underarm section of each photo was then cut out and put into a bottle for the women involved in this study to smell. Remembering that the study used 3 single men and 3 partnered men. They weren't just using the same sample for everybody involved in this study. Rather, it was 3 single and 3 partnered men out of 89 possible participants. This is where we get to the weirdness. It seemed that women found the odor of a single male stronger and somehow more attractive. Yeah. The experiment's not really all that conclusive. Yeah, there's some interesting findings, but you can't really quantify or qualify anything here very effectively. You can't say that males who are exhibiting whatever it is that the odor molecule the women are smelling are more or less attractive based on this concentration of whatever it is. Instead, all they can really say is that, yeah, past researchers found the same sort of thing and we've managed to recreate it in this study. Not at all contributing to the body of literature on the subject other than to reinforce the already well-known factors. Going from human reproduction to the bizarre spread and, to an extent, reproduction of giant Asian hornets in Europe. The interesting part of this is the genealogy. By tracking down various colonies and assessing their genome to find what is common and what is not common, researchers were able to figure out that there is, first of all, a single queen responsible for the invasion, but second of all, how they're all related and spread from there. You have bees, which are relatively useful and really only defend themselves and their colony. They will die in the process of doing so, therefore bad. Wasps are nasty, but they're generally going to keep to themselves unless they're pissed off for some reason. And then they will go full war mode and keep attacking until their threat is removed. Hornets will attack anything and everything that moves if they think it's looked at them funny. Yeah, nature's assholes. This is why the spread of hornets in Europe is really unpleasant and bad. Your first thought may be, well then how do they know that all the hornets have come from one common ancestor? And it's the same way, to a certain extent, we can do the same thing with humans. Mitochondrial DNA. This is DNA passed down only the maternal line. This means that the queens in the hive, or mothers in humans, will all be passing on a certain portion of their mitochondria with each egg. In this case, you can find that all of the wasps found both in the Dublin study conducted and those across Europe share the same mitochondrial DNA. This is why they can conclude there is a single common source for the entirety of Europe's invasion by hornets. Going back to weird science, but this time focusing on roundworms in particular. Roundworms are a species commonly used, primarily because they are surprisingly simple organisms, both genomically and physiologically. We have a well-known library of their anatomy and can basically tell you what's happening just about every point and everywhere. This is why you can also genetically modify them, as scientists did. What they did was take genes that made them able to use light and power themselves, rather than having to rely on energy from, say, the environment. This, they claim, is useful to try and understand the aging process that occurs when a cell's not able to provide enough energy. The study didn't make it so that the roundworm would survive forever this way. Rather, it was an additional boost to their functionality. Compared to their control counterparts, they lived 30 to 40% longer because of this modification. The research itself is relatively preliminary and really only builds on what's already known and adds some interesting quirks. So for now, it's not necessarily the most compelling research, but it could become something more important down the track. At the other end of that spectrum is something that's relatively important now, but probably not so important later on, unless it fits into a much larger puzzle. That is the weird step between dinosaurs and birds, and the discovery of a fossil that may fit exactly this requirement. The fossil is a 120 million year old sample, and it indicates that most of its parts are bird-like, while some of its parts are definitely more lizard or dinosaur-like, and that this may be an example of a transitional fossil, those things that are very hard to find because they often don't last very long and die in locations that are not very supportive of fossilization and often under very harsh circumstances. Therefore, we have a limited ability to not only have them generated, but then preserved. That's what makes this particular fossil so interesting. Whether it is the head shape, various parts of its legs and feet, and so on, all useful features to understand how we went from dinosaurs to birds. The next news is something that humans may find useful, primarily because it would allow us to avoid one of our biggest evolutionary needs, water. Not so much that we can ignore the need, as the need would become redundant. It's a technology designed around the idea of mitigating or making redundant the need for desalination plants. The basic concept is actually quite simple, and in fact it's pretty much exactly the same concept proposed in June. It's basically a water trap. It takes the vapor that is generated at the ocean and just above the water line, feeds it into a system, condenses it, and creates salt-free, perfectly potable water. The design is substantially more efficient than desalination plants in terms of its energy requirements, since it doesn't need anywhere near as much power to boil the water, and therefore remove the salt that way. Downside to it is that it's obviously less efficient. The researchers did estimate that given 14 possible study sites, they think they could provide enough water for 500,000 people with just one of these. So it's reasonably effective, but it's also very large. In fact, incredibly large. It's about 210 meters wide and about 100 meters tall. Yeah. Desalination plants are big, but they're not great big blocks in the middle of the ocean. Going from a conversation about water, renewables, and longevity of humans to water and how a physicist has annoyed everybody. A physicist has put forward that there is a better way to cook pasta. And honestly, their rationale is hard to argue with. What they have said is that you really only need to get as far as boiling the water, adding the pasta, and then continuing to boil the water by adding in more energy for half the time that is actually required, while leaving the pasta to cook for the other half of the time. The reason this works is very simple. The amount of energy retained by the pot and continues to be put into the water from both the hot plate or hob and the pot itself is more than enough to cook the pasta. The researchers do point out that, this is not going to give you any huge savings, somewhere between 15 cents and 7 cents per attempt at cooking pasta, assuming you're able to do so. If you only cook once a week, then you're only going to save somewhere in the ballpark of about $15 to $7 a year, so not a huge saving there. And this is perhaps why it's annoyed so many puritans of pasta cooking the way it has. This is where the second half of the method comes into play. Dried pasta can be fully rehydrated by soaking in cold water for 2 hours before it's being used. This step is probably what's annoying puritans. The process of cooking pasta is that roughly the first 10 of 12 minutes is used in getting the water to penetrate into the pasta and rehydrate it. The next few minutes are used interacting with the amino acids and proteins to make them edible. With this method, you only need to add the pasta to simmering hot water for a couple of minutes to finish the cooking process. Therefore, you basically have 1/5 or 1/6 of the cooking time required compared to what the packaging is likely to say. The next piece of news we have for you is probably just as likely to be ignored as what the physicists say about cooking pasta, and that is how you can get people to drink less alcohol, which sounds rather unpleasant in some ways. Assuming that you're not drinking to excess and are partaking in moderation, there is a reason why messaging that says reduce your consumption of alcohol doesn't work, and researchers are trying to understand why that is. Yes, there is a significant increased risk of things like colon cancer, mouth cancer, and other kinds of cancer from alcohol consumption to excess on a regular basis, so consuming it excessively is obviously bad, but this is true of everything. Consuming in moderation or only binging irregularly is where things get interesting. The researchers tried to figure out if there's a way to advertise to people for the greatest effect, so they had 3 different iterations of a survey. The survey had to be done 3 times as they were trying to figure out the relationship between things, and they had a fairly high attrition rate. They went from somewhere in the ballpark of 8,000 people initially to 4,500 and then just under 2,700. They provided advertisements that linked things like alcohol and cancer, and then they were trying to figure out whether or not this reduced consumption of alcohol. It did. If you have ever seen the Australian advertisements for smoking and the linkages to various diseases, you would understand why this is very effective. It's really quite disconcerting, and it's likely the tobacco eyeball will haunt you forever. The article does go into a range of other methods that were used, but not all, and in fact many, were nowhere near as effective as simply pointing out that there is a clear relationship. This is perhaps why California has labelled just about everything as known to cause cancer. Maybe they've got that backwards. Our final news item for you this week is largely the end of something of a saga. It's the end result to an article that was published, and it was full of interesting observations by publishing sleuths. They found that they had some big concerns about it. The most obvious and most hilarious in our view was that the error bars were not actually error bars. They were the letter T, as in what you would type, put on top of the bar. Yeah, that's not what error bars are. They're not decorative. They are meant to be there for a purpose. Despite that, that wasn't the only problem, and that is actually kind of worrying as well. There are contradictory statements in what the study did and the methods used, the type of data that was or may not have been collected. There are large sections that seem to have no relationship to other sections and were just thrown in there for the sake of fun. And finally, that there are some big questions about the lack of ability to provide the publication satisfactory proof of an ethics approval and other requested information. In the description from the publisher, after careful assessment of the concerns raised, we have concerns about the article's scientific reliability and are therefore retracting. Yeah, they used T as an error bar. It should never have been allowed to be published, and the moment that was pointed out, it should have been retracted. This is not a, oops, we made a mistake, tee-hee-hee moment. This is a, somebody's clearly pulling something very dodgy, and it needs to be handled. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.